Thanks very much, Gus. Ladies and gents, it is indeed a huge honor for me to be here and to see this assimilation of so many different concepts and so many different ideas that have been running around in the tourism and conservation world for so long, and to have them all being pulled together under one umbrella is absolutely unbelievable. But I just want to reiterate what Gus said. Thanks to Parks Victoria, to Mark and John for an unbelievable vision of putting all of this together. And for Tourism Victoria for sponsoring me. I really do appreciate it. I know that many of the people and the speakers that have been up before have all got huge scientific basis to support what they're saying. I've got none of that. I know how to catch rhinos, so if you've got any details that you need about rhino capture afterwards, I can help you, but the rest don't question. Okay? This is our opinion. It's 20 years of operating in the industry. It's 20 years of engaging with local communities and trying to develop new conservation areas. And we'd like to share with you some of the successes and victories that we've had, and try and also share with you some of our failures so that you don't make those same mistakes. Because I think that's one of the things that in the commercial sector is often not done enough. When somebody's made a serious mistake, they cover it up, get out, or go under, and nobody knows why they've gone. We need to try and share more of our mistakes, especially when we're dealing with local communities and community development, to ensure that we don't waste money in community development. We need to make sure that every buck from any source going into rural communities is spent properly. I'm going to start off by telling you a little bit about where we are. It's all about telling the story. We've heard from lots of different people how are we going to energize other people to do what we're doing, and how are we going to energize the children to do what we're doing. And it's all about the story, in my view. We've heard interesting facts that create a story. Tim Pleanary's unbelievable description of the symbiosis between the fungi and the roots of the gum trees. I mean, eucalyptus are pests in our country, and they're a disaster where I see them back home. And here they're absolutely unbelievable and very much a part of what everybody that travels to Australia should hear. Do they? Are there vehicles for sharing this unbelievable heritage that you have with international visitors? I'm sure there are. I haven't experienced them yet, but I'm sure they're there. So the story is absolutely critical. And as soon as we've got a good story, in our case, in a commercial sense, that story is owned by the staff. And when the staff own the story, they're able to share it with guests who take the story back and change the way they live, change the way they behave, the way they interact with other people. If you look at the main, our original started in Africa, obviously, and if you look at the main attractions that Africa's got, they're big and hairy, and everybody says, yeah, that's why your tourism's so great. But it's not that. The competition in Africa is also big. When we look at guest feedback, and we get every guest to fill in a feedback form if they'd like to, it's not compulsory, and 90% of the guest feedback that we get is about the people. Even though they've seen life-changing wildlife experiences, they don't record that as what's touched them. What normally touches people when they travel to Africa is the people. We operate in many different countries in Africa, 7 in total, up the whole eastern arc, as you can see from the image, starting in Kenya in the north, the Masai Mara, all the way down the predominantly greener areas, mainly savanna, and mainly marginal rainfall areas. But also across in the desert at Sossusvlei, if you look at the western side of Africa there. And Sossusvlei, the desert gets an average of 85 millimeters of rain a year on a good year, and 25 on a bad year. So we're talking about an environment that's got very little. It's moving sand, and when you drive out into those moving sands with a guide who really knows what he's doing, and get off the vehicle, and everybody is told to stand still and keep quiet. And as that peace sinks into your soul, it connects you with the earth in a way that you cannot do anywhere else or anyhow else except by getting out into that natural environment and letting it make you realize what you are and who you are and how you impact on the environment around you. So guiding is all about interpreting the environment that we have. And this model that we've developed in Africa has been so successful that we've been able to take it to India. In India, obviously, the mammals are pretty much the same as Africa. They're just slightly different. The lions have got stripes on, and the elephants have got small ears, and the buffalo have got white socks. But they've got all the same animals. And we use the same guiding techniques in trying to inspire people to the fact that Indian wildlife is disappearing at an unbelievable rate. And if we don't do something about it, it's going to disappear in our lifetimes. In India, we operate only in the central state of Madhya Pradesh, again on the western side of the country predominantly, 4 parks. And the model that we use when we're operating in these countries is designed around 3 pillars. We've heard a lot about pillars and silos and all those kind of things, and ours is exactly the same. We have conservation, communities, and world-class lodges and experiences. We don't sell wildlife. Nobody takes an animal home. They take experiences home and they take photographs home. And that's the essence of top-end tourism, is trying to create something that people are absolutely blown away by. Not necessarily the line that they've just seen, but the way their drinks are served. If you want to take good food, how do you make it great? Serve it in a great place. It's about place. It's about sense of place. It's about what we do. What park managers have in their hands are these incredible resources that they could be sharing with tourists and changing their lives. So you're not doing it from a selfish point of view. We want to do it from a motivational point of view. If you've got the minister sitting on your vehicle of finance and you can touch his heart, guess what that's going to do to your funding? So it's not about exposing or selling your resources down the river because of tourists. It's about getting people in that potentially can influence and help you protect that resource. In Africa, we've got much bigger imperatives to get it right. If we don't get the community interface right with the communities outside the park, they will eat the park or the animals of the park. Simple. So we've got a much bigger imperative than other non-developing countries to get it right. The model that I was involved in building is a place called Pinda, and I'm not going to go through statistical stories here. I'm going to try and give you 1 or 2 stories that have made me passionate about what we do. And it's this interaction with local communities. If you look at this model, you'll see that there's a pale patch in the middle, which is an island of local communities. And all around them is a slightly darker patch, which is a sea of conservation. So that's normally the other way around. You normally have islands of conservation in a sea of impact or humanity or mankind. So we had a completely unique situation when we started. We were trying to develop a game reserve in rural KwaZulu-Natal in 1990. 4 years before the elections in South Africa, low-scale civil war in that white patch, and we were going to attract international travelers at the top end of the market to come and stay in rural KwaZulu-Natal with low-scale civil war next door with international money. Spot the mistake. We were able to do that only on the strength of our vision. The ANC supported what we were doing, and we got support from the then government in exile. The Nationalist Party, who were the government of the day, supported what we were doing because they could see that changing the way conservation worked was essential for the future of conservation in the country. So we got international support to buy this private land. There was no way the community were going to let us do it on their land, and we were the enemy as far as the conservation authorities were concerned because we were capitalists. All we want to do is make money. Guess what? We have to make money, otherwise we can't save anything or help anyone. So our approach was very different to the normal approach that was held to a development, certainly in that stage in South Africa. The land that we inherited and that we bought was predominantly farmland. In the early 1930s, they were ploughing it with steam tractors. We had to remove all the farm infrastructure. When I arrived on the property, the cattle were still on the land. Thousands of kilometers of fencing, cattle dips. There were even overhead power lines that had been commissioned by the farmers for boreholes and milling machines and farm infrastructure that had never been commissioned. But across the fence were 22,000 local Zulus with no power. Absolutely mirroring the political situation in South Africa at the time. We arrived in this situation with these impoverished people outside the park and absolutely no economic permeability between the fence. They got no benefit from either side of the fence, and we saw that as an opportunity to try and turn it around. But we had to engage with them positively, and we took the same land. That photograph is taken on Mziki Marsh, where the photograph in 1936 was taken. And as soon as we let nature come back and rewild it, it added huge value to that asset. So adding value to the asset became an essential part of what we were trying to do, understanding that a lot of the marginal rainfall areas of Africa are owned by local communities. And they're impoverished. and they're predominantly cattle farmers. And we're saying, hang on, in the year 2010, we shouldn't be using land incorrectly. We don't have that privilege anymore with population pressure. Every piece of land should be correctly used. And that means that if it's not ideal for conservation, relinquish it. Put the best form of land use on it. Population pressures don't allow us to keep economic activity off land that shouldn't be. And guess what? Economically active land that should be under conservation needs to be under conservation.